All right, let's jump right into this explainer and unpack the intensely rigorous systems that keep our global food supply safe and authentic. We're looking directly at the newly updated BRCGS Global Standard for Food Safety Issue 9. Now, you might think this is just some dry regulatory checklist, but it's actually the operational blueprint used by food manufacturers all over the world. It exists to make absolutely sure that every single time you open a snack, cook a meal, or even feed your pet, you are not putting yourself or your family at risk.
So, before we get bogged down in the technical framework, we really have to ask ourselves what the ultimate stakes are here for public health and, frankly, for brand survival. How do we actually guarantee the food on our plates is safe, authentic, and legal? Well, the answer comes down to standardization. We're talking about over $800 billion of product sales impacted by this specific standard. With that kind of volume, ensuring absolute consistency across borders, factories, and supply chains is paramount. It's really about building a fortress of protocols that stops biological, chemical, and physical threats long before a product even leaves the loading dock.
Here is our roadmap for understanding this 100-plus page standard today. We'll start with a broad overview of Issue 9, look at management and safety culture, dive into the HACCP safety plan, explore systems and traceability, and then see how facilities physically defend the site before examining how we prevent and detect contamination.
Let's start right at the top with Section 1, a high-level overview of BRCGS Issue 9. It is fascinating to see how this updated standard is evolving to meet modern challenges. It places a massive emphasis on adapting to new tech and, learning from those crazy supply chain shocks we've all seen over the past few years. A real game changer here is the new blended audit option. This smartly splits the audit process into two parts, a remote document review using technology, followed by a physical on-site inspection. This was born out of the rapid evolution of information and communication tech. So instead of auditors wasting days sitting in a conference room looking at stacks of paperwork, they can now complete up to 50% of the audit remotely. That means when they finally arrive on site, their laser focus is entirely on the actual production floor, observing real-world manufacturing as it happens.
But here's the catch, and it's a big one. No matter what audit path a site chooses, every single certified facility must undergo an unannounced audit at least once every 3 years. That number is absolutely critical. Think about it. You can't just prep for a big exam when you know the date, right? The Global Food Safety Initiative benchmark brought in this mandatory unannounced audit to provide a whole new level of confidence. The certification body will tell the facility which year it's coming, but there's no way they're telling them the date. They can literally just show up at the door within a 4-month window. Facilities have to be ready every single day.
Moving right along to Section 2, Management and Safety Culture.
As we move down the hierarchy, we hit what I like to call the brain of our living factory organism, which is senior management commitment. Let's be real, a standard is just a piece of paper unless the people in charge actually care about it. The standard is extremely explicit here. Without senior management actively driving specific cultural pillars, no safety plan is going to survive in practice. The leadership team has to define and maintain a clear, written plan for developing a food safety and quality culture. This means prioritizing open communication, genuinely listening to employee feedback, and actively measuring performance. You can't just assume your staff cares about food safety. You have to train them, measure their behaviors, and build an environment where absolutely anyone feels empowered to report a risk without fear of getting in trouble.
So the crucial takeaway here is that safety is not just the QA department's problem. It extends out to engineering, procurement, and even human resources. Think about it. If HR doesn't hire or train effectively, safety fails. If engineering uses the wrong kind of lubricating oil on a conveyor belt, safety fails. If purchasing decides to save a few bucks on a cheaper, unvetted raw material, safety fails. It is a deeply interconnected web, and everyone plays a part.
Which brings us to Section 3, the HACCP Safety Plan.
If management is the brain, think of this as the nervous system of our factory. Before a single product is even made, this internationally recognized multidisciplinary framework anticipates hazards and installs exact critical limits, something like a very precise cooking time or temperature, to neutralize them. HACCP stands for Hazard Analysis and Critical Control Points. It practically forces a facility to stop and ask, what could possibly go wrong here? Could dangerous bacteria survive the oven? Could a chemical cleaner accidentally spill into the mixing vat? You identify the hazard, and you set a strict, highly measurable limit to stop it in its tracks.
But before you can even dream of implementing HACCP, you need these foundational prerequisite programs running flawlessly in the background. Think of these as the basic, everyday hygiene of the factory. If your factory has a pest infestation, or if your line workers aren't washing their hands, your fancy advanced HACCP plan is completely useless. Prerequisite programs ensure the environment itself is sound and secure before you even start processing the food.
The standard lays out a highly logical sequence for this. It essentially forces teams to visually map their entire process before hunting for any vulnerabilities. You have to draw a literal map, a process flow diagram showing exactly where raw materials enter, where they're cooked, cooled, packed, and eventually stored. Once that's mapped out, the team verifies it by physically walking the actual factory floor. Then, they figure out the critical control points, or CCPs, and set validated, strictly measurable limits to ensure the final product remains perfectly safe.
Let's shift gears to Section 4, Systems, Audits, and Traceability.
Now we transition into the memory and immune system of the operation, where the facility actively checks its own health. You can't just check your own work once a year and pat yourself on the back. The standard demands a scheduled, highly rigorous internal audit program spread throughout the entire calendar. They require at least 4 different internal audit dates across the year, and here's the kicker. These must be conducted by independent auditors. That means a manager absolutely cannot audit their own department. It completely eliminates blind spots and ensures that the prerequisite programs, the HACCP plan, and the food defense systems are actually functioning when the external auditor isn't looking over their shoulder.
Now, this metric is absolutely wild. If a contamination event happens, a facility must be able to achieve full mass balance traceability of that product within just 4 hours. 4 hours. Imagine a supplier suddenly calls in a panic to say a giant batch of flour was contaminated with a dangerous allergen. The factory has exactly 4 hours to trace every single ounce of that flour. They need to know what finished products it went into, exactly where those products are sitting in the warehouse, and which grocery stores they were already shipped to. It is an incredibly demanding test of a site's record keeping.
If that 4-hour trace uncovers a real serious issue, this exact sequence of recall steps has to be executed. A product recall is basically a nightmare scenario for any food brand. To ensure panic doesn't override protocol, the standard mandates that facilities run a mock recall at least once a year. They have to verify out-of-hours contact details, test their communication plans with customers and regulatory authorities, and literally practice the physical logistics of recovering the affected product. They have to be fully prepared for the absolute worst-case scenario.
Okay, moving into Section 5, Defending the Physical Site. Let's see how all of this builds into the physical body of the factory itself, protecting the premises from both external and internal threats. Because food safety isn't just about accidents, it's also about intentional harm. It's a sad reality, but intentional, malicious contamination is a genuine threat. This requires sites to map their vulnerabilities and completely lock down their perimeters. This is called food defense. A site must conduct a heavily documented threat assessment that covers everything from disgruntled employees to external saboteurs. They have to control site access with visitor recording systems, tightly restrict access to production areas, and ensure that highly vulnerable intake points are securely monitored at all times. Within those factory walls, the spaces are mapped into distinct production risk zones. This is to ensure raw materials literally never cross paths with ready-to-eat finished goods. Think about it. If you're handling raw chicken in one room and packing fully cooked chicken in another, you absolutely cannot have the same airflow, the same drainage, or even the same staff easily moving between those rooms. The facility must physically design maximum segregation into the building, right down to designated changing facilities and highly specific footwear for those high-risk zones.
Finally, we reach Section 6, Preventing and Detecting Contamination. This is where we get down to the actual factory floor to examine the granular physical defenses against contamination. This is where all those theoretical plans finally meet the heavy machinery. These are the specific threats the standard requires every facility to mitigate, and it gets incredibly specific, down to banning staples and snap-off blade knives in open product areas. Yes, literally banning staples. If you bring a document into a production area, it cannot have a staple in it because that tiny piece of metal could end up in someone's food. Pens have to be specially designed without small external parts, and ideally they should be detectable by metal detectors. Even strongly scented chemicals are completely banned because they can actually taint the flavor of the food being produced.
Even something as simple as a broken glass jar triggers a massive, highly documented quarantine and cleaning response, just to ensure zero fragments reach the consumer. If a glass container shatters on the line, production stops instantly. No questions asked. The area is quarantined. Specially designated, highly visible, color-coded cleaning equipment, which is stored completely separately from normal everyday brooms, is brought in. The line is thoroughly cleaned, everyone's footwear is inspected, and a manager must formally document an inspection and give authorization before a single machine can be turned back on.
Because the risks are so high, the testing of metal detectors on these lines must be intensely rigorous. You can't just plug a metal detector in and assume it's functioning perfectly. The standard requires staff to take little plastic wands containing known sizes of ferrous, non-ferrous, and stainless steel spheres and run them through the exact center of the product flow, which is actually the least sensitive part of the detector, at full operational speed. If the machine doesn't automatically reject that test piece, the line is stopped immediately, and all product that passed through since the last successful test is fully quarantined.
So we leave you with this final provocative thought. Is the most advanced detection equipment in the world ultimately useless without the human element of a strong food safety culture? Regulations, strict audits, and high-tech X-ray machines are absolutely vital. But at the end of the day, it is the dedication of the real people on the factory floor that truly guarantees our safety. The BRCGS Issue 9 standard is incredibly comprehensive, mapping out everything from global supply chain traceability to the exact type of pan allowed near a conveyor belt. But as we saw at the very beginning of this explainer, if the management culture is broken, the entire system fails. What good is a top-of-the-line metal detector if the employee running it is too afraid of their boss to report a failure? It all comes back to people. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive into the blueprint of our global food safety.